So good morning, my name is Jefferson G. Puntawe and I am going to discuss what is Mendelian and Non Mendelian. So let's start. Mendelian inheritance. 1860s, in an Australian monastery, there lived a monk named Mendel, Gregor Mendel. Monk had a lot of time on their hands and Mendel spent his time crossing tree plants. As he did this over and over and over and over again, he noticed some patterns to do the inheritance of trait from one set of pea plant to the next. Now, notice in that very brief description of his work that the word chromosomes or genes are nowhere to be found. That is because the role of this thing in relationship to the inheritance and inherited that had not been discovered yet. What makes Mendel's contributions so impressive is that he described the basic pattern of inheritance before the mechanisms for inheritance was even discovered. Mendel studied the inheritance of 7 different features of peas, including height, flower color, seed, and seed shape. To do so, he first established pea lines with 2 different forms of the feature, such as tall versus short height. He grew things line for generations until they were pure breeding. Then breed them to each another and observe how these traits were inherited. In 1865, Mendel presented the result of his experiment with nearly 330,000 pea plants to the local Natural History Society, based on the pattern he observed, the counting data he collected, and a mathematical analysis of his result. Mendel proposed a model of inheritance in which characteristics such as flower color, plant height, and seed shapes were controlled by pair of inheritable factors that came from indifferent versions. One version of factor is the dominant form could mask the presence of another version, the recessive form. The 2 paired factors separated during gamete productions, such as each gamete randomly received just 1 factor. The factor controlling different characteristics were inherited independently one of one another. By carefully analyzing his plant numbers, he discovered 3 laws of inheritance. So here is the 3 laws Mendel inheritance. So first is we have the law of dominance, second one is the law of segregation, and the third one is the law of independent assortment. So the law of dominance, in a cross of parents that are pure constantly trait, one form of the trait will appear in the next generations. Offspring that are hybrid for a trait will have only dominant trait in a phenotype. This helped the Punnett square. This helped us illustrate the crosses Mendel did, as will assist you in figuring out a multitude of genetic problems. We will start by using a p-square to illustrate Mendel's law of dominance. Recall that he discovered this law by crossing a pure tall pea plant and a pure short pea plant. Mendel models the law of segregation, but this model alone doesn't explain why Mendel saw the exact patterns of inheritance that he did. In particular, it doesn't account for 3:13:13:1 ratio. For that we need Mendel's law of segregation. According to the law of segregation, only one of the 2 genes copy present in organism is contributed to each gamete. That is make and the allocations of the gene copies is random. When an egg and a sperm joins in fertilization, they form a new organism whose genotype consists of the alleles contained in the gene test. The test cross. Mendel also came up with a way to figure out whether an organism with a dominant phenotype, such as yellow seed pea plant, was a heterozygote YY or the homozygote YY. This technique is called a test cross, and it is still used by plant and animal breeders today. The Law of Independent Assortment. The Mandel Law of Independent Assortment states that the alleles of two or more different genes assorted into differ independently from one another. In other words, the allele of gametes receives for one genes does not influence the alleles received for another genes. The reason for independent assortment. To see why independent assortment happens, we need to fast forward half a century and discover the genes are physically located on chromosomes. To be exact, the two copies of genes carried by an organism are located at the same spot on the two chromosomes of a homologous pair. Homologous chromosomes are similar but not identical, and an organism gets one member of the pair from each of its two parents. Non-Mendelian inheritance. Mendelian inheritance patterns involve genes that indirectly influence the outcome of an organism and obey Mendel's law. Most genes in eukaryotic species follow a Mendelian patterns of inheritance. However, there are many that do not. Non-Mendelian inheritance is a general term that refers to a pattern of inheritance in which traits do not segregate in accordance with Mendel's law. This law describes the inheritance of traits linked to the single genes on chromosomes in the nucleus. Codominance. Codominance is believed to have violations of law dominance. When the alleles of particular trait are codominant, they are both expressive equally, rather than a dominant allele taking complete control or a recessive allele. This means that when organisms have two different alleles, it will express both at the same time. For example, is the speckled flower, where a plant breeder has bred two different color of flower together, resulting as a pickled hybrid that has patches of color of both parents. Incomplete dominance. Sometimes in a heterozygote dominance, allele does not incomplete make the phenotypic expressions of the recessive alleles, and there occurs an intermediate phenotypes and the heterozygote. This is called incomplete dominance. With the codominant alleles, both traits are expressed at the same time. Whether in complete dominance, the same things occur, but the traits are blended together rather than occurring the discrete patches. It thus refers to the conditions of heterozygous, where a phenotype is intermediate between the two homozygotes. Example is that in some plants, the cross of red and white produce pink flowers, progeny. So, for okla plant, Mirabilis jalapa or snapdragons, polygenic inheritance. Some traits are controlled many genes such as height, IQ, skin color, eye color, etc. Polygenic inheritance occurs when one characteristic is controlled by two or more genes. Often, the genes are large in quantity but small in effect. Skin color is Davenport, 1913. The Jamaican found that two pairs of genes AA and BB cause a difference in skin. Multiple alleles. Mendel studied just two alleles of his P genes, but real population often have multiple alleles of a given genes. Pleiotropy. Some genes affect many different characteristics, not just a single characteristic. An example of Myfan Syndrome, which results as several symptoms, usually tall heights, thin finger and toes, lens dislocation, and heart problems. These symptoms, although not seems to be directly related, can be tracked back to the mutations of a single gene. Gene linkage. Each chromosomes contain more than one gene. If it's the gene are situated in the same chromosomes are fairly close to each other, they tend to be inherited together. This type of coexistence of two or more genes in the same chromosomes is known as linkage. For example, is that some combination of wing shape and body color are inherited together. Fruit flies and have brown bodies are most likely to have normal wings, while fruit flies have a black bodies are more likely to have vestigial wings. Extranuclear inheritance. Through the genes of nuclear chromosomes have a significant, the key role in the inheritance is most the trait from generation to generations. They altogether not considered as the sole vehicle of inheritance. Certainly, experiment evidence suggests the occurrence of certain extranuclear genes of DNA molecules in the cytoplasms of many prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. For example, is the mitochondria and chloroplast have their own DNA and produce on their own side of each cell. Mitochondria DNA is passed down from a mother to her offspring because the mitochondria in sperm cells don't have into the egg. Thus, the entire mitochondrial DNA in the offspring, whether male or female, originally came from one or a female parent only. So, end of the topic. Thank you.